So good afternoon. It's really my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to launch a new initiative which aims to increase business investment in nature-based solutions. So I am Violaine Berger. I'm the Director of Ecosystems at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD, which is a business organization, a global organization of some 200 companies sharing the same commitment to sustainability. So I will briefly introduce you the new initiative we're launching today before leaving the floor to our panelists. So we'll have Mr. Mark Tercek, President and CEO of the Nature Conservancy, followed by Mr. Neil Hawkins, Corporate Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at the Dow Chemical Company, and followed by Ms. Brandy Wilson, who's Global Sustainability Director at CH2M. So basically, we all know about the issue. Over the past 50 years, it's over 60% of the world's ecosystems that have been degraded, leading to a dramatic loss of ecosystem services. And by ecosystem services, we mean, of course, all the services that nature provides, be it clean air, clean water, healthy and productive soil, or, for example, pollinator services provided by insects. And if we take into account the effects of land use change, this degradation represents over 20% of global GHG emissions. So what is the role of business in all this? So companies affect either directly or indirectly ecosystems and the services that they provide, but they also depend upon these services for their operations. So it's really in business interest to invest in reversing this trend. And by doing so, by investing in ecosystems or natural infrastructure, companies can indeed reduce their risks and the risks related to ecosystem degradation. But not only can they reduce their risk, but they can also generate co-benefits for society and the environment. Restoring ecosystems or investing in ecosystems can also help reduce GHG emission. It can enhance carbon sinks. It can also reduce climate-related risks, for example, floods, storm surges, or heat waves, for example. So at the WBCSD, we've been working with our member companies and our partners on strengthening the business case for natural infrastructure to demonstrate that investing in natural infrastructure makes business sense. And we've been working very closely with our partners, so with CH2M, with the Nature Conservancy, with the program co-chairs at the Dow Chemical Company and Shell, as well as with a group of 30 companies, to develop the new initiative that we're launching today, which is this natural infrastructure for business online platform. So what is it? It's an online platform, a website that you can access right now. And that contains, all the information that companies need all what companies need to know about natural infrastructure. There's case studies, there's examples of business action. There's also a document, for example, that enhances the business case for investing in natural infrastructure. And there's also tools, different tools that companies can use at different stages of a natural infrastructure project, be it to screen for a project, or, for example, to compare different scenarios, to compare a green versus a grey infrastructure, or a hybrid solution as well. And ultimately, this initiative really aims to, by 2020, to get more companies to systematically assess natural infrastructure options when they invest in new sites or new projects. And by doing so, what they'll do is that they'll contribute to enhancing ecosystems, restoring ecosystems, or creating new ecosystems. So on this, I will leave the floor to our panelists. So we'll start first with Mr. Mark Tussack from the Nature Conservancy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. This is a topic I'm very enthusiastic about. I'm here proudly as the CEO of the Nature Conservancy. We're one of the world's very big environmental NGOs. And so, of course, we believe in protecting nature. For us, it's obvious. We think it's just the right thing to do. And that's what our supporters have allowed us to do for more than 60 years now. We love our passionate supporters. And you know, in the old days, that was the formula for success. Find people who love nature and with their help protect nature. But of course, it dawns on us, there are too few people like that. There are too few financial resources on the side of nature. We need more allies. We need more money, more investment. And so I really am enthusiastic about the idea of investing in natural capital. Think of nature, if you will, as infrastructure. So we like to call it green infrastructure, to contrast it with man-made gray infrastructure. Well, it turns out that green infrastructure is a very good deal. Green infrastructure often costs less than gray infrastructure, performs better, and brings a whole bunch of co-benefits for free. It's simply a good deal. So we believe if we can use our science to help businesses and governments better understand that, we can direct a lot of dollars now flowing toward gray infrastructure instead to green infrastructure and scale up investments in nature across the board. I feel so strongly about this. I wrote a book about it called Nature's Fortune, Why Saving Nature is the Smartest Investment We Can Make. It's now out in paperback. I don't know if I'm supposed to promote my book. But anyway, in the book, I go through all the environmental challenges that I can think of. Climate change, which we want to talk about today, agricultural issues, issues connected with storms, urban conservation issues, and in most of these cases, there are superb investment opportunities in nature. Let me just give you a couple. One project that we're very proud of at the Nature Conservancy, but I'll defer to Neil Hawkins, is we're partners with Dow Chemical, systematically going through the business's operations to see where investments in green infrastructure might outperform gray. And then together we disclose that information to the business community and government community because we don't want to hoard this. It's not our information. We want to spread the word and have more people imitate. But here we're at a climate convention. So how can nature help us address the climate challenge? Well, we know that ecosystems going forward, if we can protect and restore them, could address about 20 to 25% of our emission reduction challenge. Forests is the most obvious example. Forests have gotten the most attention. How can we motivate business and government to invest in forests? Well, we say, let's think about what else forests do. So, of course, forests are a very valuable piece of infrastructure in water supply. So we've had great success working with beverage companies, site by site, protecting watersheds in order to secure their clean water. FEMSA Coca-Cola, the dominant Coca-Cola bottler across Latin America, has been a great partner of ours. And we now have about 35 of these so-called water funds. Each are a little bit different, but always users of water or folks who otherwise benefit from the forest's role in water, invest in upstream conservation because it's a good deal. One example is in the town of Monterrey, the industrial capital of Mexico. In Monterrey today, in the rainy season, they have terrible floods. In the dry season, they have terrible droughts. Now, what's happened? Lots of things have happened, but one of the key factors behind that is the forest has been very degraded. That forest really operated kind of like a sponge for the town of Monterrey, the city of Monterrey. When the rainy season came, the forest would capture the water, and in the dry season it would release that water, purified and clean too. Well, the forest is degraded. We've motivated the business community of Monterrey with FEMSA's help to create a fund. Now it's more than $50 million to invest in restoring that forest. That's what we mean by investing in green infrastructure. Another concern connected to climate change. How will we protect communities from sea level rise and extreme weather? So many of our cities are situated on coasts and are vulnerable. Hurricane Sandy in my old hometown of New York City vividly brought that challenge to people's attention. How can the state and city of New York protect against future Hurricane Sandy kind of events? And of course, this is a problem that's happening all over. Well, again, it turns out that green infrastructure this time coastal ecosystems can be a very valuable form of protection. In a situation like New York, it can't only be green infrastructure, so it will be green and gray, but marshes, ecosystems, dunes, mangroves, in different situations, oyster reefs, coral reefs, these infrastructure opportunities turn out to be a very good deal. So as long as we can document that, then the engineers making these investment decisions, whether for business or government, we believe will increasingly choose the green infrastructure alternative. And in almost every one of these cases, there are many co-benefits. Carbon sequestration opportunities, important for COP21. Biodiversity habitat, important for lovers of nature. Community benefits. Imagine forests in urban situations today, lowering temperature, cleaning the air, beautifying cities. So that's basically my point. In most environmental situations, green infrastructure ought to be carefully examined. Also, in my view, in most of them, it can be a compelling alternative to gray infrastructure. Sometimes it needs to be a combination of green and gray. We enjoy working closely with CH2M Hill, the global engineering company, because they've been quick to identify this as an important toolkit for them as an engineering company. What are the situations when nature will outperform man-made equipment? Let's double down there. Not only does this result in more dollars flowing to protect nature, there's one other silver lining or benefit of this, and I'll end with this. We often find we work with kind of hard-nosed business people or engineers who simply want to solve a problem. We persuade them to roll up their sleeves and work with us in identifying these opportunities. Their engineers spend time with our scientists. We get to know one another. And I think there's an environmentalist in everyone. And so one by one, we're winning over engineers and businesses and governments to better understand the practical reasons for protecting nature, but also to understand the Nature Conservancy's traditional motives. It really is simply the right thing to do. Anyway, I encourage you to look hard at this opportunity, kick the tires, ask us questions. Any of us will be happy to help. The Nature Conservancy has a number of colleagues here in the room in marine area, in agriculture, with regard to forests, wetlands. In each of these cases, we think we have the science to show you that investments in green infrastructure can outperform gray. Thank you very much.
Mark, thank you. And he really gave a terrific picture of how green infrastructure, natural infrastructure can really provide what are known as ecosystem services. Now, what I'm going to turn to is more from a company perspective. I'm co-chair of the Natural Infrastructure Platform within WBCSD, which has a 2020 target to get companies to consider green infrastructure, natural infrastructure, at the same time as when they might be making other gray infrastructure investments. So that is the target, to really increase the awareness and provide the tools to get it done. Well, let me tell you, the Natural Infrastructure for Business platform that is announced today is a very impressive playbook for how any company can go in and assess what the options are. It doesn't mean that green or natural infrastructure will be the right thing in every opportunity, but this will allow a roadmap for any company to make that judgment. So let me make a few comments from a Dow perspective on how we got to this point. About 5 years ago, we began a journey thinking about nature and Dow's interface to nature. We do have a value of protecting the planet, so that is a value. So it fits with, conserving nature for nature's sake. But that, in the business context, does not work, okay? There are always limits to how far that can go. And so what this is really, what we focused on over the last few years is what value, economic value, is nature providing to the company? How do you assess that value? And then how do you build it into business decisions? And that's what TNC and Dow have partnered on. And on a separate stream, we've been publishing a lot of papers and developing tools that are being made available to all companies. But a company like Dow is heavily dependent on nature. We use a lot of water as part of our processes. We're located on water, rivers, or coastal areas. And the communities around our plants also receive a lot of ecosystem service value as well. So we feel like we've begun to understand how to assess those values and build them into business decisions. And we set our own target in 2025 that we would be applying these new systems for evaluating nature's value into all our business decisions by 2025. And further, we'll be trying to develop projects that deliver $1 billion of value that are win-win for nature and for Dow. So it's a very ambitious target, and one that we believe is achievable. And let me explain why. So looking at the different kinds of ecosystem services that Mark mentioned already, provisioning of water, cleaning of water, we already benefit from both of those. But then when you move into even one step further, water treatment, there are so many opportunities where as part of a water treatment system, a natural infrastructure piece can be added that might do the job at lower cost and do a better job of polishing and treating water. We actually had a project more than 10 years ago at our Seadrift, Texas plant. We had a courageous engineer who made the choice of pursuing building a wetland of several hundred acres instead of pouring the concrete to build another water treatment plant. We had a professor come in on sabbatical to do a third-party look at the economics of that project. And in that one project alone, which was published in an environmental economics journal, that one project alone delivered $200 million of value and provided several hundred acres of habitat in a critical bird migratory area that didn't exist before. So that's the kind of project where you can meet regulatory requirements, treat the wastewater, but at the same time create excellent habitat for nature and biodiversity. We have other projects, one that we collaborated on with the Nature Conservancy that's still playing out, where we're looking at trees, planting, reforesting trees, and I'm not talking about small numbers, millions potentially in the Houston area, as a way to help clean the air. They have ozone and smog challenges there. And they also had a lot of trees die because of drought. So we're together looking at the science and working with the regulatory agencies to see if that could be incorporated. But at the same time, in less ambitious ways, we're using trees to help clean groundwater at some sites. So that is also ecosystem service. You're providing cleaning of water, but at the same time natural habitat. So I'm going to end there. There are many other examples, but I think the main thing I want to leave this audience with is the WBCSD tool, which reflects work of all three of our organizations and many other contributors, is really a fantastic step that companies can use today, starting tomorrow, to begin to incorporate natural infrastructure into their decisions. And I strongly encourage people to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Mark, for setting the stage for us. So you've heard Mark talk about the value of nature and how that's important to his organization. You heard Neil also speak to that and speak as well at the same time to the value of doing business well, staying in business so that you can continue to do wonderful things. And those are both really essential components, so thank you guys for setting that stage. CH2M has some values as well that we bring to this. So we've been in business since 1946, and our business was founded on the idea that water should be clean before it's dumped into a river. Now that sounds very foreign to all of us today, but back then that was a revolutionary idea. People used to just dump wastewater straight to the streams because dilution was the solution to pollution, right? So we've moved past that, thankfully, and in the mid-1980s, CH2M started investigating what we now call green infrastructure. And at that time, it was permeable pavements, which now are very commonplace. And that was something that was cutting edge at that time. So now we're moving into the next generation of how are we thinking about engineering, how are we thinking about infrastructure, and how can we do that with a look towards the future and what we're going to need to meet future demands. So we used to size things like storm drains based on the historic rainfall record for an area. How much rain do you get? How big does your storm drain need to be? Now we're starting to size storm drains based on future predictive climate models. So how bad do we think it's going to get? How big does the storm drain need to be? And in some cases, you just can't build a storm drain big enough. So this is where we're looking at nature to help us to provide the solutions, right? Because in nature, you have redundant systems, you have these interconnected ecosystems and webs that mean that there's a lot of resiliency in the system. So instead of just relying on one solution, nature relies on many solutions. And so that's what we're doing as well with natural infrastructure. So for example, if you have a seawall or a levee in place, and you're worried about how well that's going to hold up against the next storm, then build an oyster reef because that reduces the tidal energy coming in and actually makes your seawall or your levee more effective. Are you worried that you're not going to be able to get your wastewater clean enough out of an industrial process? Add a wetland to that. That creates an additional buffer and that cleans it far beyond regulatory compliance. So then the business benefits from being able to go far beyond what the regulation scheme is and what the future regulation scheme might be, and the watershed and the environment benefit as well. And you get natural habitat, you have plants moving back in, all kinds of benefits like that. So that's just a little bit about where we're coming from in this practice as well. And we really look at this as an opportunity to be creative and to be innovative and to help all of our partners be able to achieve their goals as well. So I've been asked to provide you guys with a little bit of a sneak peek into what's in the tool. And the thing that's really at the center of the Natural Infrastructure for Business platform is a decision tree that identifies kind of what skills you need at what stage and who needs to be involved when. So the first thing is really to look at it from a business perspective. What is the problem that you're trying to solve, to Neil's point? What is it you're trying to achieve with this particular piece of infrastructure? And looking at that very critically and saying, okay, are there other ways to achieve that? And bringing in the multidisciplinary team to look at it. So the tool has this decision tree that is tied to a list of criteria that business should consider, and those criteria are both financial and non-financial to help guide the decision process and to create a way to have that discussion with management in a company about what the options are and what some of the other benefits and co-benefits could be. The platform also includes access to a dozen free online tools that companies can use to assess different options for natural infrastructure. And then that whole thing is supported by case studies of where natural infrastructure has actually been effective at solving company problems and where it can work for you too. So I think the real strength of this tool is that it's evidence-based. We're not talking about things that are just ideas or things that maybe we could think about doing someday. These are things that companies are doing right now to solve their infrastructure problems, save money in many cases, and then also benefit the environment and benefit the communities that they serve. So everything is very much based on proofs, and you can always rely on engineering companies for that, right? We're not just gonna, engineers are kind of conservative by nature. They tend to like proof. So that's really the central thing that I wanted to communicate with you guys, is that this is really developed by businesses, for businesses, to make business sense and to be relevant in making decisions so that we can drive better outcomes out of infrastructure choices. And with that, I'll just wrap up and go for questions.
So thank you to our three panelists for bringing different but complementary perspectives from the conservation community, business, and also the view of the engineer community as well, and for also giving examples of different projects, of what's already happening out there. So we've got a bit of time for some questions from the audience, and I'm going to take a mic.
Everybody sold Mrs. Green. Everybody said yes.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm wondering about working with government, working with local governments particularly, because that's where you're going to be locating and where a lot of the challenges will be. Is there any sort of plan with the tool as to how it will accommodate that sort of scenario?
Thanks, that's an excellent question. One of the legacies that we have from our engineering history is that we've got 50 years of build it strong, build it stout out of things you know about. And that's been integrated into our regulatory schemes and ordinances and how local governments protect against floods, intervene in floodplains, all of these other things. And so oftentimes it does take a collaboration up front with the regulatory community to assure that we can actually start to implement some of these activities.
Yeah, I would just add, we approached this session more from the point of view of business needs to be made aware, et cetera. I think the same thing needs to happen with government at the same time. Because when you get down to local decisions, there are always many different viewpoints. And if everyone doesn't understand the benefits of the ecosystem services, not just to the company, but also to the community, you can have very good projects stopped because people don't understand what a company is trying to do. So I would say we do need to make sure that we're also rolling out to local governments, but also national governments or regulatory agencies at the same time.
Good afternoon, and this is very exciting to hear about. Phil Koval from Forest Trends. One of the things that we've observed about interacting with business in the subject of natural capital solutions is that some of the infrastructure, some of the green infrastructure that's built, we generally have a sense that it's lower cost, that it can be effective, but then there's the question of margin of error. And ecosystems are marvelously complex, and they defy, the engineer's ability to really kind of chalk it all out and figure it with a level of precision that's often required. So it's kind of a related question to the one about the government interaction. The question is really how you've been able to overcome where that's been a challenge. Let's say the margin of error or the level of uncertainty related to some of these investments.
Yeah, it's a great question. I might speak to that. So I think we're making good progress, but I think a lot of the recent progress has been needed to be made by the environmentalists arguing for investments in green infrastructure. Because in my opinion, in the not really so recent past, we were winging it a little bit. We knew anecdotally that robust, intact ecosystems provided all sorts of ecosystem services. A great example would be coastal ecosystems. The areas where the ecosystem was intact, less harm was suffered during, say, a big storm event. So that's great. But that's not exactly the same thing as saying to an engineer who has to make a decision about achieving some security, some protection, where the ecosystem's no longer intact. You need very good evidence. You need evidence that is as good for the green infrastructure alternative as the engineer has for the gray. And engineers have extremely good evidence for gray infrastructure. So at the Nature Conservancy, what we're doing, not by ourselves, we've got some great partners, WCS, UC Santa Barbara. We have this effort called SNAP, Science for Nature and People. And we're thinking hard about, okay, where are the gaps in that precision, that evidence for the decision makers, and let's assemble the data as quickly as we can. So here in the room is Mike Beck. Mike, you might wave. Marine scientist, longtime marine scientist at TNC, but now he's really focused on, okay, when do reefs, coral reefs or oyster reefs, provide the needed protection in general, but then more specifically, in what circumstances and against what kind of risk? And it turns out to be a really rich field. We can close those gaps, but we need to do that work. The work with Dow has been great for TNC because together we're tackling this information need. And in this case, 1 + 1 is worth much more than 2 because the TNC science team has one way of thinking about it. The Dow engineers, on the other hand, think about it differently, and so then together we really get at it. What's the needed information? This example that Neil mentioned I find so exciting. So, here they are expanding this enormous plant in Texas. They could put scrubbers in chimneys to deal with the local ozone issues, or there could be massive reforestation, including in Houston, which could use some new trees. So as TNC, we love that. We say, that should happen. But it's not that simple. The Dow team's got to figure out exactly what will the trees do. They need to comply with the law. And the regulators have an obligation to society to make sure the green infrastructure intervention will work. And I hope we haven't finished yet. I sure hope it will work. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's some combination of green and gray. And environmental, so this is really my pitch to the folks on the environmental side of the dialogue. We can't wing it. We need good evidence. But this, the truth shall set you free. As we better understand with more precision what works and what doesn't work and why and what circumstances and what the costs are, that will really power us moving forward, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, just very quickly, your point about engineering certainty, which I think is what we're talking about here, it's something we have to really work on, because in a lot of these cases, the gray infrastructure solution is a known, sure thing. Okay, it costs a lot, but if they're tasked to meet that permit limit by X date, they know it'll work. Okay, or same with the coastal wetlands. Raise the dike to protect or enhance a wetland. It's really up to us to continue to build out the proof points, the case studies that show that the science and engineering is supported by these projects. And I believe over time we will do that, but there is a desire, I would say, amongst engineers in my company, but also engineers in other companies to do this, but you also have clients that want to have the certainty at the same time. So we need to continue to build the case examples with robust proof that they worked as well, and not just the economics, but the performance.
And that's exactly the reason why CH2M and the Nature Conservancy entered into a 5-year collaborative agreement to prove the business case for natural infrastructure. So we are actively looking for projects together to do and get those projects funded, make them make sense for the people who are doing it, and also prove that these solutions are working, set up the monitoring and make sure that we've got TNC's scientists and our engineers working together to figure this out. One short story, I was out on a reef build, and actually, Mark, you were there too.
Where is this?
This was down in Louisiana. Oh, yes. Yeah, just last spring. And it was the first project that our collaboration had done together. And so what we were doing was we were actually constructing an oyster reef with about 200 volunteers. Yes. And we formed lines out into the Gulf Coast. We were all up to our knees and our waists in the water, and we're handing down these big chunks of concrete that's enhanced with oyster shell. They're called oyster castles. And they sort of stack together like Legos, and they provide a great foundation for the oysters to adhere to, because it turns out that oysters really like to stick to other oyster shell. You can't just throw anything out there. It has to be oyster castles. So we put the oyster castles out there, and we're standing back on shore, and we're all feeling very proud of ourselves for having built this oyster reef. And I was standing out there between one of TNC's biologists and one of my engineers, and another person from CH2M. And she said, so when is this going to be working? Like, when is it done? And the biologist said, well, we should start to see some bivalves moving in here in the next year or so, and perhaps we'll think about seeding them. And the engineer said, oh no, it's already working. You see how the water's breaking over the reef? It's done. We're good. So, so some of this too depends on what the outcome is and what it is that you're looking for and what your goals are, and how that fits into the overall scheme of the project.
Okay, good. Thank you. We've got the time to take maybe one more question. Yeah.
Hi, Clyde Graham from Fertilizer Canada. I'm just wondering if you have thought about how it would apply to farm enterprises, and Dow is an agribusiness to some extent, to a great extent, and I know, Mark, you've been involved a lot in agricultural issues. So, many farms are businesses, and some of them are very large.
Well, let me just take that first. Yes, absolutely. We've been thinking about natural infrastructure as it relates to agriculture in general. A couple of examples. One, in our collaboration with the Nature Conservancy, we actually took a sugarcane farm in Brazil and optimized all the land choices and the management of the land to enhance biodiversity as we ramped up production of sugarcane there. So that's a very good example. Another one is work we've done on sustainable beef production in Latin America, looking at boosting the output of beef per hectare or acre, while at the same time enhancing nature on that land so that you could protect more rainforest and not sacrifice more. So the simple answer is yes. We've been thinking about it and partnering with others that are more directly, we actually grow sugarcane in Brazil, but more directly with other farming interests in the regions.
Yeah, I would only add, there are a bunch of exciting projects underway all around the world. And boy, it's important that we get this right, because agriculture on the old-fashioned basis is going to be a real threat to our conservation objectives or our climate change objectives. The anecdotal evidence from the case studies is very good, but if there's any group that's conservative about really wanting to understand the pros and cons of any choice, it's farmers. As one farmer told me in America, I only get so many at-bats in my career as a farmer. And they're not even that quick to be impressed by an example from the farm next door, because no two farms are alike. Here I would say we're partnering with agriculture players like Dow, but people like Cargill and Mosaic and small and big all around the world to compile evidence again. We really need evidence of what works, what doesn't work, when and where. But I think it's one of the more important opportunities that we all collectively face ahead.
And if you visit our brand new platform, which was just launched today, we have some agricultural case studies in there as well. So from Syngenta and Altria and a couple other companies.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I think we're coming to the end of this session. So I invite you really to have a look at the platform, to connect online and to look at all the resources that are now online in the platform. And as well, it was highlighted by the panelists, this is really the start of a journey. We need to collect more evidence to demonstrate that these type of projects work, and to demonstrate that they're not only cost efficient, but they also bring about benefits in terms of environmental and social co-benefits as well. I think we can really thank our three panelists for their interventions today, and thank you all for participating.
If you would like to stay in the room, we've just had news that the Australian Minister of the Environment is going to make an announcement about climate change and the environment in the next few minutes. So. So we're setting up for the news session now. If I can ask anyone who wants to continue their discussion to move out into the hallway as we're ready to start the next session.
We got room for Ada up here. Ada, would you like to come up? We'll be one more minute. No, Anthony Watson. Okay.
It's about 15 minutes out, we're stuck in traffic. I'll just put a chair at the end.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think so. So I'll speak a moment of Inga and then Ada. Then after that, we'll do the Kimberley Land Council or the UN University. Yep. 10, 15 minutes. Yeah. So a bit of start. Yep. Right. Well, welcome this afternoon to everybody here. My name is Greg Hunt. I have the honour of representing Australia as Environment Minister. Technically, this is a press conference. Unofficially, it's a triple launch pad. And I want to introduce some of the people with us. We're absolutely thrilled to have Inga Anderson, who is the global head of the IUCN, Emily Pidgeon from Conservation International, Samuel Hunter from the United Nations University. We've got Ari Goring from the Kimberley Land Council, Ada Greenbury, Asia Pulp and Paper, and Anthony Watson, the chair of the Kimberley Land Council in Australia. Really, there are three things that we want to set out today that we're taking forwards from this Global Landscapes Forum and the first week of the COP proceedings. One is a global rainforest recovery initiative. Two is a blue carbon partnership, and Sam and the Kimberley Land Council will launch the United Nations University's report into the potential for 1 billion tonnes of saving from Indigenous savanna management. Now let me begin very briefly with the Global Rainforest Recovery Initiative. It builds on the work of the Asia Pacific Rainforest Recovery Initiative, and it's a partnership arrangement aimed at practical projects. The partnership really involves 4 different groups. It's about developed countries, it's about international organisations, it's about private sector companies coming together to work with rainforest nations to preserve and restore rainforest. The purpose of this is about making sure that we have 3 things occur. One is, of course, an increase and preservation of the great biodiversity benefits of rainforests around the world. We know that Science magazine said only 2 years ago that in the preceding 12 years there had been the loss of 2.3 million square kilometres of forests around the world. An extraordinary figure. Secondly, we have the community benefit, particularly with landholders being engaged in management programs where there is support. And thirdly, in this, the COP and the Landscapes Forum, it's about reducing emissions by restoring the balance of CO2 or carbon in the landscape itself in the form of the great rainforests. In order to do this, we bring the partners together, we remove the bureaucracy, and we make rapid strides in putting together projects. The Papua New Guinean minister is on his way and will hopefully make it through the Parisian traffic before the end of the session. But they are, for example, a tremendous partner. So within those partnerships, we have Australia. We have tremendously positive conversations with Norway and Germany and other European countries, as well as the United States. We have Papua New Guinea, and then the partnerships with the IUCN, with C4, the Clinton Foundation, the Nature Conservancy, the Global Environment Facility. I've just met with Naoko Ishii, and she is very committed to engaging in the rainforest proposal. And then companies such as Kellogg's, Qantas, Baker and McKenzie, Credit Suisse, and in particular Asia Pulp and Paper. So we believe that over the next 5 years we can help mobilise funds for practical projects that will actually rehabilitate rainforest in the three great rainforest basins of the world, in the Asia Pacific, in South America and Central America, and in Africa. And there are nations on both sides that are very keen to participate, and there are international organisations that are very keen to participate. Australia, as co-chair of the Green Climate Fund, is in a fortunate position to be able to help mobilise these funds on an early, rapid basis for real project recovery. The second initiative, which I am delighted to launch, is a blue carbon partnership. It follows the same model of bringing together donor nations, international organisations and private sector firms, and to work with, in particular, coastal economies, coastal states that are seeking to protect or to enhance their blue carbon resources. In many ways, blue carbon has been the poor cousin of the global climate change task. It is an enormous opportunity, as has been recognised here, for reducing emissions, for improving marine biodiversity, and in particular for providing support for traditional communities and coastal communities. Now we know that in Australia, for example, we have about 2.5 billion tonnes of carbon in our blue carbon resources, but the figures are not as well developed for not just Australia but for other countries as they are for terrestrial carbon. So we have asked the IPCC chair, Hu Xiang Li, to consider preparing a special report on blue carbon accounting, stocks, sources, and the potential for blue carbon sinks. Blue carbon is, of course, the great mangroves of the world, the seagrass resources of the world, and it is also the salt bush or salt marsh resources of the world. By bringing those funding sources together, applying them to projects, we're working with people such as Emily Pigeon at Conservation International in finding the right projects and mobilising quickly. Already we have Costa Rica, Indonesia, Conservation International, RARE, the Global Environment Facility, the IUCN, the International Oceanographic Commission, and the South Pacific Regional Environment Program and the Pacific Islands Forum engaged. We will take each of these initiatives and build them from here with working meetings, and we aim to have projects on the ground within the next 18 months actually delivering mangrove rehabilitation and forest restoration. So with that, I want to thank all of the partners, and I perhaps might call upon Inger Anderson, the global head of the IUCN, to make some comments, and I thank her for her tremendous work.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Minister Hunt, and thank you very much to all the partners that are engaged in this. Essentially, for the three initiatives that are being launched today, I'll speak on the blue carbon as well as on the rainforest. And the bottom line here is think of nature as the ally. Think of nature as the ally for what we need to do. Sylvia Earle always says, no blue, no green. These two things are intricately linked. And what we're trying to do, and what we're trying to do here, is really to talk about nature-based solutions. We know that we're putting an incredible pressure on this good planet by our own footprint. We understand that we need to lift 1.3 billion people out of poverty. We know that CO2 is doing damage. We know we need to figure out how to decarbonize the economy. That's clear. At the same time, we need to also think about the solutions that nature offers. And so the story is really one of investing in nature, and nature will invest in you. Failing to invest in nature, nature will send you invoices in terms of floods and droughts and disease, etc. And so these two initiatives that I will speak about here are exactly seeking to focus on this. It's bringing a varied circle around the problem, and that's what you've just heard now from the minister. Let me speak a little bit about the blue carbon, although I know that Emily will take us into much greater detail. She really is a scientific brain behind all of this. But these mangroves, these lagoons, these seagrasses, these salt marshes, what's happening is that we love the ocean. We love the oceans to death. We love them. We want to live right on the edge of it. We want to dredge it so we can go to its very edge. That's nice. However, in so doing, we are undermining the very foundation of the living, breathing oceans. That lung that provides us the opportunity to live and to enjoy the oceans. So, the oceans really offer us not just the blue carbon, because that would be a very sanitized talk if that was all it is, just a store for carbon. It's also a source of protein for a vast amount of people. It's a source of biodiversity. And yes, if we protect our sea line, it also becomes a source for protection for resilience. When those major storms will come, when sea level rise to some extent will happen, etc. So we need to figure out how we can invest to have returns on carbon, yes, returns on fish production and thereby poverty reduction, and return on biodiversity and return on resilience. And we need to think about how we plan our cities, how we plan our coastal zones, how we will see, when you look at any map, how we all like to live, whether it's in the Americas, Asia, Australia, or in Europe. We like to live on those coastlines. But clearly we need to think about how we can live with the coast and not against the coast. And so what needs to be done on this side? Well, we need to figure out how to do fast-track financing, and that's part of what we will be doing now. We need to figure out how we can get blue carbon into coastal zone management, and how we can get it into our greenhouse gas inventories. We need to do more science and research, and obviously capacity building. And that's what we hope to do in this partnership. I'm just delighted that with a strong lead from Australia, with our strong partners, Conservation International, UNESCO, UNU and others, we can move this forward. And of course with the private sector. And in a sense, the story on rainforest is not that much different. It's living with nature, not against it. It's figuring out how we can protect what is and restore what is no more, but what could be brought back into working landscape. Just earlier on today, we announced under the Bond Challenge that we are now at 83 million hectares for restoration. In fact, Ida was there helping us make that announcement. And we think that by the end of this COP, we will reach the 100 million hectares. So that's part of the Bond Challenge, which was launched in 2011, saying that by 2020, we will have a pledge of a total of 150 million hectares back in restoration by restoring there are 2 billion hectares of degraded land on this good earth. By getting those landscapes back into working landscape, we are of course easing the pressure on the tropical forest. So we need to do both. We need to have the foot on both accelerators, protecting the pristine and the tropical forests that are under threat, and working with those degraded landscapes, getting them back into working landscapes. They might not be able to go completely back to what they were, but certainly they can be a very important element. So having this partnership, and I would say that actually the Asia Pacific Rainforest Summit that Minister Hunt arranged in November of last year together with leaders from the Pacific and Asia was a very good galvanizer for this conversation. And so moving it forward now in this partnership of the Global Rainforest Recovery Initiative is something that we from IUCN look greatly forward to. And we will work with our members. We have Australia as a member, CI is a member, and many others. We will work with the private sector to put our collective best foot forward in this endeavor. Thank you very much.
Could I now invite Emily Pidgeon from Conservation International, who has been, I have to say, one of the real global drivers behind the recognition and extension of blue carbon.
Well, thank you for that, Minister. I've worked on this for 5 years now, but I happen to have seen possibly 5 years worth of work out of the Minister and his staff over the last couple of weeks to put this together. So I'd like to thank them and him personally for the leadership in bringing us this blue carbon partnership. Myself and Conservation International have been working on blue carbon with our close partners, IOC, UNESCO and IUCN now. And in that time, we've actually seen some pretty major breakthroughs. We've really seen advancements in the science. We've seen individual policy pieces move forward on blue carbon. And we've seen individual projects come together in a number of places. And many of them, some of them, Costa Rica, Indonesia, are partners on this new partnership. And in that time, we've learnt that blue carbon systems, the seagrasses, salt marshes and mangroves that the Minister referred to, sequester carbon at rates that are up to 5 times what we see in terrestrial forests. And this results in these incredibly large, globally significant stores of carbon. But we also know that these are arguably the most threatened ecosystems on Earth. We're losing them at 1 to 2% per year, and all those special services that numerous services, fisheries, coastal protection that Inga referred to, we lose those at the same time as we lose this carbon. And that 1 to 2% per year loss is resulting in up to 1 billion tonnes of CO2 per year going into the atmosphere as a result of these systems. So why this partnership is really fundamentally important, I think, is that it provides us with a foundation to amplify, build and scale up all these efforts that we've already been incrementally doing over the last 5 years. And so I think this leadership by Australia and this really bringing us together is very timely, and it's essential if we're going to start addressing the loss of these systems that we're all so dependent upon. So thank you very much, Minister. I am grateful and I'm excited to start working on this in the immediate future.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask Ada Greenbury to speak briefly in relation to Asia Pulp and Paper and the business side, and then we'll turn to Sam, I'll call on you to launch the Savannah Management Initiative.
Thank you. My role is a private sector player, and I found that the roundtable launch here today will provide really good policymakers with a crucial private sector perspective. I believe that the stated key goals of the Rainforest Recovery Plan to end natural rainforest loss in the region by 2030 and restore large tracts of degraded rainforest by that date to support, to synergize with and to build alliance with the actors behind other initiatives. But it will provide more than a private sector perspective. It is a sign, I hope, of things to come. It is unique that it has been designed by the Asia-Pacific region and for Asia-Pacific region and with experience and funding from the region. As the Global South takes more leadership in sustainability and conservation, this program is one which we can all be proud of. And as we start to take position of leadership, we should be ensuring that the schemes we design are as simple and practical as possible, because I've seen it in the field and been implementing it for 3 years. This initiative should be judged not on the size of bureaucracy that it creates, but its impact on the ground. Commercial activities can exist in harmony with efforts to protect and restore rainforests within the Asia-Pacific region. This confidence comes from my own experience in leading sustainability journey in the Asia Pulp and Paper Group, one of the largest pulp and paper producers in the world. Almost 3 years ago, we published our forest conservation policy, which basically outlines the end of deforestation in our supply chain, protection of high conservation value, high carbon stock, and respect of community rights and free and prior informed consent, and protection of peatland, including mangroves and coastal areas. One of the purposes that in the rainforest recovery plan that I would like to that will be to one of the purpose in the rainforest recovery plan will be to explore public sector policy related to deforestation from a private sector perspective, and formally present this deliberation at the next meeting in Brunei. We will have our meeting early next year, and we hope from private sector to develop an agenda around a small set of working groups. There are a few agendas that we hope is going to be included. First, we want to examine the drivers of deforestation from a private sector perspective and promote closer regional coordination with a clear understanding of which landscape in which region we need to focus on. Then we need to clearly identify the stakeholders in each landscape and link it to the supply chains of all downstream partners. We want to leverage the expertise and commercial acumen available to us, addressing reasons for the blockage of financial flows from the large multilateral donor funds to rainforest conservation activities, to create a closer relationship between funding and activity on the ground. We think we can add value by examining ways to strengthen the private sector's agroforestry collaboration with community is key to promote sustainable forestry practices amongst medium and small holders. Communities have to own this work as well, with us bringing them on board. We will consider how to best improve cooperation between the private sector, NGOs, and donors in the forest conservation sector. And finally, we must promote best practice private sector behaviors in relation to sustainable forest management and to end deforestation. I just want to say something about what Inger said when she said nature is our ally, but I really believe that we are nature. I read it somewhere. We are nature, and we are trying to defend ourselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Ada. And now it gives me really great pleasure to introduce Sam Johnson from the United Nations University, and Ari and Anthony to release the UN University report on Indigenous savanna management and to launch their billion-tonne initiative to reduce emissions through Indigenous savanna management around the world.
Well, thank you very much, Minister, and it gives me great pleasure to launch or talk about our report, which we've launched today, as the Minister said. It's the result of 3 years' hard work and collaboration with many, many partners, and I'd like to thank the Minister and his department because they've not only funded the report, but they've been very important partners intellectually in working with us on that report. But another very important partner which I'd like to acknowledge here has been the Indigenous peoples that we've worked with around the world, in particular in Northern Australia, and the KLC have been an important part of that collaboration. And that's one of the unique things about this initiative, I think, which is very laudable and makes a big difference about this, is that it is Indigenous-led. And I'll briefly skip through some of the main findings, but I'd like to give the chance to the KLC to sum up and to convey how they've led the world in this amazing story. And it is another story about using nature to help us combat, address, tackle climate change, and using an important part of nature, and that is the role of wildfire in nature. And it's funny because actually wildfire and its impacts is one of the most dramatic impacts of climate change, and it's familiar to everyone around the world. And we're seeing dramatic impacts. One of the most dramatic impacts of the recent El Nino has been wildfires in many, many different countries. And that reflects, in some ways, the larger story that this initiative tries to capture, and that is that fire, it plays an essential role in the world's cycles, in its greenhouse cycles, in its biodiversity cycles, in its rain cycles. And the history of wildfires throughout the world over the last 2,000-3,000 years is that it was very, very stable, like many of the other cycles when fire was in the hands of Indigenous people who were living in the landscapes which are very fire dependent. And with colonisation, that stasis, that balance has been disrupted. And you can see in the global fire activity maps around the world the extent of that disruption. So we've seen a dramatic increase in cataclysmic fires around the world. And according to the scientists, we're going to see an even further increase in that. So one of the big impacts of climate change is an expected increase in global fire activity of somewhere between 5 and 30%. So which contributes over in a net sense, over 2 gigatons of carbon to the world's atmosphere. So it's a very significant source of greenhouse gas emissions. But it's also the story about traditional fire management is about bringing that global fire imbalance back into balance by using traditional early dry season cool burns. You manage to reduce the amount of wildfire and make the landscape a much happier landscape and the biodiversity a much healthier biodiversity. And that has been pioneered in many ways, that reintroduction in Australia. And not only have they done it for biodiversity and cultural and economic reasons in Australia, but it's also been able to capture the carbon benefit or the carbon reduction in that. And so you can find in Northern Australia that carbon reduction of up to 30% is been verified and monitored by Western science and been able to give Indigenous communities in remote locations carbon credits and an income to help them supplement their lifestyles and to help them maintain their landscape in a manner which they want to. And if we spent the last 3 years working on an initiative which looked at the global effect or the global applicability of this technology or this knowledge, if you want, and found that in all the continents of the world, and in particular in Africa and Latin America, the opportunities for learning from this experience in North Australia were enormous. And as the Minister mentioned, the mitigation potential from the reduced amount of fire and also from the health in the biodiversity that you restore is, we calculated, up to 1 billion tonnes per annum of carbon mitigation. But more importantly, I think, it's the only viable form of adapting to that increased amount of wildfire in the future from that impact of climate change. Even in the richest countries in the world, like in the US, they do not simply have the resources to fight fire in the traditional way of suppression and helicopter bombing and stuff like that. So this is really the only adaptation mechanism to that really dramatic impact of climate change. And finally, one other point I wanted to highlight was that along with this reintroduction of traditional fire practices come many cultural, social and economic benefits for these Indigenous people in Northern Australia, and they're well documented, and my colleagues from KLC will highlight them in a minute, but they're also available to people in Africa and Latin America and Asia where we looked at. And they're the driving forces for those communities. They're the reason they want to do this and also contribute to tackling climate change at a global level. Details of the report can be found at the website at tfm.edu.unu. And as I said, the report is launched today. About an hour ago, I loaded it up to the website. So if you want to find out more details about particular sites in Africa or Latin America or Asia, or about the global assessment of this potential, you'll find it on our website. Thank you.
Ari and Anthony from the Kimberley Land Council.
I'd as well like to thank you, Minister Hunt, for hosting us here and launching this really exciting initiative. I also want to recognise the leadership of Aboriginal people across Northern Australia. It's a collective knowledge, traditional fire management, and it's really having a transformative outcome for the landscape of Northern Australia. In the Kimberley, the North Kimberley traditional owners have abated over 300,000 tonnes of carbon through reintroducing traditional fire management back into the landscape. And that's a really exciting opportunity for us to be able to share this knowledge with Indigenous peoples around the world in those landscapes that are similar to ours in Northern Australia. And these projects not only abate carbon, but they also create landscape scale biodiversity protection and jobs for people living in remote communities. So they really have a transformative outcome and benefit for those landscapes. And it's really exciting to sort of see be able to connect with Indigenous people around the world and bring these opportunities to them as well. So I'll pass to our chair of the KLC, Anthony, to say a few words.
I'm proud to be an Indigenous person of Australia, and we came here to share with the rest of the world our projects. So we do play a role as an Indigenous person in emission system reduction and biodiversity. And the Minister's announcement today is very welcoming, and it helps us to participate and continue our role within biodiversity and emission system reduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Sam, to Ari, and to Anthony. The last person I want to introduce who's gone out of his way to make it here today is Charles Abel. He's the Papua New Guinean Minister for Planning. And Charles, if I could briefly call upon you to just talk about what Papua New Guinea is looking for and doing in the rainforest space. I think we've been very proud to have an engagement with you, but I think the plans and projects that you have are one of the leading examples worldwide.
Thanks so much, Minister. And I wasn't quite expecting to have to say a few words, but thanks Stephen Hooper at the back, who's one of our good consultants assisting our team here at COP and furthering the interest of Papua New Guinea, but also our people, obviously, the Indigenous people that own the rainforest, and some of our strategies around trying to utilise rainforest and also contribute to the issue of climate change as well at the same time. Yeah, he told me I wasn't going to have to say anything, but so thanks for that, and thanks for placing me at the end of the table here,
it's
almost falling off the stage.
And
thanks so much, Greg, for yourself and the Australian government and this particular initiative. Obviously, our Forest Minister has been more intimately involved over the last few days. I've only just arrived on the scene myself, but he's been involved in some of the detailed discussions with you. But we thank you very much for the initiatives and the announcements that you both made yesterday, and Papua New Guinea's attempt to come to the fore as well, with a minimum of 2 million hectares of rainforest, loggable rainforest, and also 800,000 hectares in terms of restoration of degraded areas. And our intention to ban round log exports by 2020, I think was announced yesterday, I believe. And then of course your announcements today and your intention and the to help further some of the initiatives around RED and RED Plus are greatly appreciated. We're in a development cycle, obviously, and we're struggling with that process, and we're trying to come to terms, obviously, with what's happening globally, and try to provide development solutions for our people, but at the same time try and answer to some of the critical issues at hand and develop an economy around that. So, at planning, we've got a responsible development strategy and plan, and subsequent to that, a medium-term development plan, and our forest and our tuna and our biodiversity, and even things like population management are parts of that. So we call these elements and things like our tuna and our large rainforest resources strategic assets in the global economy because of their global significance, particularly now in relation to climate change and so forth. So we're very keen to jointly partner with and develop mechanisms around these wonderful assets that we have so that we can offer solutions to the world, but at the same time respect the custodians of that forest and their wishes and aspirations for development as well. So we're just very pleased that we've got partners like Australia that continue to come forward and help countries like Papua New Guinea in the development process, but obviously other people as well. And we'll work as hard as we can to realise your intentions as well, Greg, and the Australian government, and our other partners. And Papua New Guinea is very keen to provide some of the underlying basis, which is the forest, wonderful virgin forest, which is a custodian of so much richness and biodiversity, and obviously a carbon sink and all the rest of it. So we have these wonderful assets. We have the intention and the aspiration, and we're looking for partnerships to help us commence a new development path and break out of this cycle that we find ourselves caught in, the poverty cycle and the pressure to develop our resources in a non-sustainable way because of this trap that we find ourselves in. And so we want to provide and assist the world with some of these solutions, as I say, but we need help in that regard. So we very much appreciate the continued help of the Australian government. Greg, thanks very much and congratulations.
I don't think we could have had a better summary about the goal and the intention and then the needs of individual countries, and that's why these two partnerships have been set up and the initiative which Samuel's leading. Quick question, Lyndall up the back, are we tenants that have overstayed our time in this room? Oh, good. So, look, we're happy to take any questions on that basis then. If there's anybody, you should feel free. Up the back, please. If you could just identify yourself, and we'll see if we can send a microphone down if somebody might... you'll project?
Project, thank you. So, kia ora, I'm an Indigenous person from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I'm a professor at the University of Alberta in Canada. Oh, wow. And I'm absolutely fascinated, and this is an extremely exciting announcement. So, I wonder if you would mind, please, Minister Hunt, commenting on how you see this as perhaps offsetting the carbon emissions from the expansion of the coal industry in Australia, and perhaps including the damage to the Great Barrier Reef. Kia ora.
Sure. Look, I understand the point. What is it that this conference is about? And the conference is about providing a cap on global emissions, which is the only thing that the planet knows, and a cap on national emissions. We've just been fortunate to reach and beat our national target for 2020 and announce it. Some other countries haven't been able to do that and so seek offsets. In our case, we've been able to do that. As others have said to me, each country has to be able to develop as they see fit, but within the confines and the caps that they are looking for. In terms of the Great Barrier Reef, the World Heritage Committee has just worked with us and the IUCN on a Reef 2050 plan on the allocation of $2 billion over the next 10 years, 58 million which was announced only 2 days ago, and we worked to end the dredge disposal that we had inherited of 5 major projects and put in place a law to ban forever dredge disposal in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. So that practice has now ended, and it ended on our watch, and it ended, I've got to say, through a partnership with Inga Anderson and the World Heritage Committee, and so that's quite a profound change. So thank you for the question. Any others? Sir?
My name is Christian Lannecker. I work at South Pole and Climate Friendly, and we have about 50 projects under the Emission Reduction Fund in Australia, which already provide carbon management to more than 1% of the land surface. You invited the private sector to those initiatives, and I would be very happy to join in, but how? What's the exact offering? What do you want from the private sector? Is it projects? Is it funding? Is it all of it?
So this is a very interesting example. In Australia, the way in which we've done it is there's been a carbon purchasing fund, which we call the Emissions Reduction Fund. There have been bids put in. The KLC has been successful. They bid in, and an independent regulator awarded contracts, and the contracts were generally for 10 years, and they were then paid on delivery of the fire management. So you obviously know this because you're doing this in Australia. This is the sort of thing that we would like to do internationally by building partnerships with international organisations, donor countries and private sector firms. And the way in which it would operate is we will now go and host a series of working meetings. We'll take your details at the end, get you involved, and at the end of the day, it's about delivering practical rainforest, blue carbon and fire management projects on the ground around the world. One example, we've met with the aviation industry. They are likely to adopt a system which will be very similar to Australia's safeguards model of, let's say a firm had 100 tonnes of emissions a year. You can add 1 million to the end of it. In the aviation sector, if they go above that after 2020, they'll have to purchase offsets. And it's those offsets which will help drive many of these projects in the medium term. In the short term, it's countries and international organisations. But private sector firms can also help deliver exactly as you are. So we'll get your details. If Lyndall at the back raises her hand, if you can talk with Lyndall, that would be it. There we go. This is doing exactly what it should. Next, any other questions, players? Or all done? Done. So thank you very much, and can we thank all of our partners? Yeah, no, I know. We've always one of the best things I think you did a great job on the spot. And when they said you at the end, I thought, oh, Charles wants to speak. But it was just one of those things. Yeah, great. He's going to muscle my way in the middle there. Thanks. Thank you. Ada, great job. Huh? Yeah. Oh, not me. Thank you. Great family. Thank you. Oh, no. Thank you. Be in touch.